А зараз я з запрошенням, тоді вас прошу присісти, запрошую пані Рікарду Рігер. І допоки пані Рікарда Рігер готується до виступу, я прокоментую з тих даних, що я отримав до цього форуму. Пані Рікарда Рігер має надзвичайний досвід роботи в дуже складних перехідних економіках і перехідних суспільствах, якщо можна так сказати. Це Північна Корея, і це Камбоджа, і це Таїланд, і тепер Україна, і Нью-Йорк. Це дуже різні світи, і дуже, але переважно це країни і суспільства, і економіки, які були під викликом дуже великих змін, знаходячись в дуже складних, якщо не сказати, скрутних економічних умовах. Україна, ми маємо надію, має свій план, і програма розвитку ООН, вона має на меті, і своя місія – це допомагати країнам створювати плани покращення життя суспільства і економіки. З великим задоволенням запрошую пані Рікарду Рігер до мікрофону.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the introduction, and it is a very great pleasure for me to be here today and to talk about economics, but not only economics, because as the United Nations Development Programme, we very much see the interface between economics, the social sector, and environment, which we, as put together, consider as sustainable development. Why is that important? There are economic imbalances, which we see in countries as well as between countries. Some countries are richer, some are bigger, some are smaller, some are not as rich, some don't have the natural materials and the potential. We also see social injustice or inequities between men and women. Look at the panel, look at me. We see disabled people not being able to come up to the floor. We had to walk up the stairs. I don't know whether there was an elevator which would have brought somebody in a wheelchair here. So there are lots of social issues which include education and health, as well as environmental issues. As we all know, the Rio Summit just took place last year. On are we using the resources today in such a way that our future generations don't have them available anymore? Are we polluting so much that children are born with brain damage, etc.? So there are all these issues that work together, and we very strongly believe that economics alone is not a sufficient indicator to determine the wealth of a nation as well as its future. And for that purpose, about 20 years ago, the United Nations Development Programme developed an indicator called the Human Development Index, which brings together elements of health, such as longevity, child mortality, and education, how many people in a country can read, write, etc., how long do they go to school, as well as GDP, which is very, very important. And what we've seen in the last 20 years since we've been measuring this, that there are countries which are maybe extremely rich in terms of GDP, fantastic figures, but where the Human Development Index remains relatively low. On the other hand, we also see countries where the GDP is relatively low, and one of the best examples is Cuba, but the Human Development Index is surprisingly high, because the country has invested in education, in health, in social infrastructure. Is there a trend that can be seen? In fact, this year, the United Nations Development Programme issued a report which was called The Rise of the South. And the South are countries which are considered as developing countries, Cuba, Brazil, etc. And what we found, surprisingly, that for some countries, that the improvement in GDP was surpassed by the improvement in human development. So theoretically you could say, okay, if I get richer in economic terms, then I'll also invest some in education and health, and slowly we'll move up simultaneously. But that wasn't the case. There were some countries for which the human development, the life expectancy exceeded faster, the level of healthcare was much better, the educational attainment was better, etc. That grew faster than the GDP. The question was why? And we found that there were three main determinants for that. And I think this is something that can also be used in Ukraine as a country, as well as a region, say Lviv or any of the others in Ukraine. The drivers for development that were identified across the globe were a proactive developmental state. And by that we mean that there are policies for public and private sector based on a long-term vision and leadership with shared norms and values and rules and institutions that build trust and cohesion. Now that's a challenge to have, and I recognize very much that in a country like Ukraine, a transition economy where you get independence, where you have to sort out your institutions, this is somewhat more cumbersome than in a country that has been independent, say India, since 1947. So there are issues where Ukraine can learn from the others with regard to a proactive developmental state, shared visions by the nation, predictable rules, regulations. Another determinant why human development worked better for some countries than for others, or increased better than GDP, was that these countries, and here we're not only talking about Brazil and India, but also about Vietnam, Ghana, Bangladesh, countries which we often perceive as being with very low development, but they did better because they tapped global markets. And the very interesting part was that they did not only direct their attention towards one group, one bloc, but they actually were very much linked with each other. And we can see that countries like India and Bangladesh, and of course Brazil and the others, developed trading patterns which moved away from the traditional big economies like the United States or the European Union countries. So the globalization, the fact that they were linked with many trading partners around the globe, was very important for them to actually absorb the shocks and not be as affected by the shocks that we have seen, for example, in Ukraine, but that they were able to move forward. And the last element, so there are three determinants why countries do very well. The last one is that there was a determined social policy and innovation. There was a very conscious effort by these governments to invest in healthcare for all, to include as many people as possible. We're talking about the disabled, the gay and lesbians. We're talking about women getting encouraged to participate in politics, etc. And they very much focused on innovation, including in education, tapping the possibilities that our new ICT allows us, using these tools also for business, small-scale business and bigger business, was a very important factor in their overall improvement of human development. And I think you'd all agree with me that economics is a very, very important driver, and economic figures are very important in a nation's scorecard. But much more important is the people that make up a country and how socially included and including they are. We can see that in countries in the Arab states where you've had a big dichotomy between one group and the other. People felt disenfranchised, people wanted to have a voice. And I think as Lviv and other regions of Ukraine prepare for either the integration with the EU or globalization in general, they need to keep in mind the ultimate objective remains to improve the livelihoods of the people, to improve their choices and opportunities to realize themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Thank you very much for such a positive outlook and advice to Ukrainian community and Ukrainian people. I have a question, not prepared previously, but I was thinking about the possible conflict between globalization, which quite often offers copy-paste approach. Best practice is excellent, right? But quite often it is resistance by unique, by policy come to the roots. We have a unique past, and we have our own vision of how community could develop their social policy and social infrastructure others. So Ukraine is in front of possible DC-FTA agreement, right? That means many of programs could be offered to us as a copy-paste approach. So what is your advice on this way? Where is a good harmonization or harmony between all these two trends? Thank you.
Thank you. That is a question very dear to my heart. Copy-paste does not work. That we know. And as UNDP, a partner to government, I mean, we are in all of the countries where we work, 166 countries, on request of government. And the value added that UNDP has is to bring experiences from other countries, but to help a country, in this case Ukraine, to develop its own solutions. It may be slower than if copy-paste were taken, but it's much more sustainable because this is then a national solution. What we advocate for is see what is out there, see what opportunities exist,